April 28, 2007. Radio City Music Hall, New York City. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell walks to the microphone and says the name that the entire league already knows. JaMarcus Russell, quarterback, LSU. The Oakland Raiders' #1 pick. The first player selected in the entire draft. The room erupts. Back in Mobile, Alabama, people are crying in the streets. The contract $68 million. He was 21 years old. November 2024. Jefferson County Circuit Court, Alabama. A lawsuit is filed not by a bank, not by a hedge fund, not by a failed business partner, by a high school. Williamson High School in Mobile, Alabama. The school where JaMarcus Russell first learned how to play football. They are suing him for $74,000. Donation money. Money raised to buy equipment and uniforms for teenage kids chasing the exact same dream he once had. $68 million. Then $74,000. Same man. 17 years apart. On the surface, this looks like the story everyone already knows. The lazy quarterback, the wasted arm, the guy who took the money, ate too much, checked out, and got what he deserved. That story has been told 1,000 times. Sports radio has been laughing about it for 15 years. But I've been going through the documents, the contract details, the ESPN investigations, the court records, the interviews Russell gave when nobody was really listening. And what I found is not that story. This isn't a story about a man who threw away $39 million. This is a story about a 21-year-old kid from one of Alabama's poorest cities placed on top of a burning franchise surrounded by people taking from him, given no real tools to survive any of it, and then blamed completely and permanently when he didn't. JaMarcus Russell didn't fall from the top. He was dropped. And nobody who dropped him has ever had to answer for it. Nobody has. If you've never heard the full story, not the punchline version, not the sports radio version, stick around. Because by the end of this video, you won't be angry at JaMarcus Russell. You'll be angry at the system that built him up, used him up, and then handed him the bill. Subscribe if you're new. And let's get into it. Mobile, Alabama, 1985. Not Birmingham, not Atlanta, not somewhere with a skyline you'd recognize. Mobile sits at the very bottom of Alabama, pressed against the Gulf Coast, a city that history passed over after the Civil War and never fully came back for. In 1985, the year JaMarcus Russell was born, Mobile's poverty rate was hovering above 20%. In the neighborhoods where black families lived, where JaMarcus grew up, that number was higher, significantly higher. His father was not there. He was raised by his grandmother. Her name was Alzonia Brunson. She was not wealthy. She was not connected. She had no path to offer him except the one he would have to build himself. But she offered him something that, as it turns out, almost nobody else in his life ever would. She loved him without conditions. Not because of what he could do, not because of what he might become, just because he was hers. He was the only one who had that, and he didn't know it yet. In Mobile, in the late 1990s, a young black kid with no father and no money had a short list of realistic futures. The military, a warehouse job at the port, the streets, or if God gave you something physical that most people don't have, football. God gave JaMarcus Russell something physical that almost nobody has. His arm. From the first time coaches at Williamson High School watched him throw, they understood they were looking at something rare. Not good. Not promising. Rare. The ball traveled differently when he threw it. The trajectory, the speed, the way it arrived at its destination, said thing cannot be coached. You either have it or you don't. JaMarcus had it in a way that made grown men stop talking mid-sentence. Williamson High, a public school in a low-income part of Mobile. small bleachers, old equipment. The kind of place that produces 1 or 2 players per generation who actually make it out. This was his world, this field, these people, this city. And every door that opened for him, every teacher who noticed him, every coach who invested time, every friend who wanted to be around him, opened because of the arm, not because of him, because of what he could do with a football. Nobody separated those two things for him. Nobody said the arm is a gift, but you are more than the arm. Nobody asked what JaMarcus Russell wanted when there was no game on Saturday. Nobody asked. At LSU, the arm became national news. In his final college season, he threw 23 touchdowns. His completion rate was 57.6%. He was 6'6", 265 pounds, with a release that NFL scouts described in terms usually reserved for once-a-decade prospects. Draft analysts compared him to John Elway, not similar to John Elway. Comparable to John Elway. LSU prepared him to throw. LSU prepared him to read defenses, manage a huddle, execute under pressure on Saturdays in front of 92,000 people. LSU did what LSU was built to do, what LSU did not do. What no one in Mobile, no one at Williamson High, no one in the entire pipeline that produced JaMarcus Russell was prepare him for what came after the throw. The money. The people who would appear the moment the money arrived. The difference between a $68 million headline and a $31 million reality. The specific loneliness of being the most famous person from your city and not being able to trust a single person in your circle. None of that was in the curriculum. On April 28, 2007, JaMarcus Russell walked across a stage in New York City and shook Roger Goodell's hand. He was wearing a suit. He was smiling. Mobile, Alabama was celebrating like it hadn't celebrated anything in years. And nobody, not his agent, not the Raiders, not the NFL, not one person in that building, stopped to ask whether he was ready for what came next. They only cared that the arm was. The number was $68 million. That is the number the Raiders announced. That is the number ESPN reported. That is the number that ran across every sports ticker in America on the day JaMarcus Russell signed his rookie contract in September 2007. $68 million. For a kid from Mobile, Alabama, whose grandmother had raised him in a house where that number was not just unimaginable, it was a different language entirely. But here is what the ticker did not show. The guaranteed money, the money Oakland was actually legally required to pay him, no matter what happened, was $31.5 million. Not $68 million. $31.5 million. The other $36.5 million existed only if the Raiders chose to keep him year after year and chose to keep paying him. They could cut him at any point and owe him nothing beyond what was already guaranteed. This is how NFL contracts work. This is how they have always worked. The big number is for the press release. The guaranteed number is the real contract. JaMarcus Russell heard $68 million. His family heard $68 million. Mobile, Alabama heard $68 million. The Raiders knew it was $31.5 million. They had always known. Before we go any further, let's do the actual math, because this is important. $31.5 million guaranteed. After federal taxes, roughly 37% for that income bracket, you are looking at approximately $19.8 million. Add Alabama state income tax agent fees of around 3% and various other deductions, and the realistic number that JaMarcus Russell had available to build a life with was somewhere between $17 and $19 million. Not $68 million. $17 to $19 million, paid out over several years, not all at once. That is still generational wealth by any normal standard. It is still more money than most people in Mobile will see in 10 lifetimes. But it is a completely different financial reality than $68 million, and the decisions being made around JaMarcus Russell in the fall of 2007 were being made based on the wrong number. When you come from nothing and suddenly have everything, the first thing you do is take care of the people who were there when you had nothing. This is not irresponsible. This is not naive. This is the most human response imaginable to escaping poverty with people you love still trapped inside it. JaMarcus Russell started taking care of people. Family, childhood friends, people from the neighborhood, people who had known him before the arm made him famous. Reports from that period estimated he had somewhere between 15 and 20 people in his regular circle that he was financially supporting in some form, housing cars bills, daily expenses. The estimates on what this cost varied, but multiple sources placed it at somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 per month. That is between $600,000 and $960,000 per year, just on the people around him. This wasn't showing off. This was loyalty. This was the only definition of success he had ever been taught. You make it out, you pull people with you. Nobody in Mobile, nobody at Williamson High, nobody at LSU had ever given him a different definition. So he used the one he had. The problem was the math. At $80,000 per month, with an after-tax reality of roughly $17 to $19 million spread across multiple years, the runway was much shorter than anyone in that circle was calculating or admitting. On the field, 2007 was difficult in the way that first years for young quarterbacks are almost always difficult, but made significantly worse by one specific decision the Raiders had already made before Russell threw a single professional pass. He had missed the entire training camp. The contract dispute that delayed his signing meant that while every other player on the Oakland roster was spending the summer learning the offense, installing the system, building chemistry, with receivers running the same plays over and over until they became instinct. JaMarcus Russell was not there. He arrived in September with a $68 million headline and 0 days of professional preparation. And the Raiders, having paid $31.5 million in guaranteed money, needed him on the field. So they put him on the field. He started. He struggled. The offense around him was inconsistent. Head coach Lane Kiffin, who would be fired after just one full season, was already in conflict with owner Al Davis. The organization was not stable. It had not been stable for years. Between 2003 and 2007, the Raiders had gone 19 wins and 61 losses. They were not a development environment. They were a franchise in freefall, and they had just handed the controls to a 21-year-old from Mobile who had never taken a professional snap. Al Davis stood at the podium on draft day and said, "He has a big arm. He has everything you need to be great." He was talking about an asset, not a person. But here's what nobody reported. Inside that Raiders facility, in the film rooms and meeting rooms, where NFL quarterbacks are supposed to learn how to read defenses at the professional level, JaMarcus Russell was sitting with a playbook that had been installed over an entire training camp he never attended. The language of that offense, the terminology, the protection calls, the route combinations, the pre-snap adjustments had been built across weeks of repetition that he had simply missed. He wasn't refusing to learn the playbook. He was trying to read a book written in a language no one had taught him yet. The coaches saw a player who seemed disengaged. The media saw a player who didn't care. What neither group was asking, what no one in any official capacity asked, was, what does it actually feel like to be 21 years old from a poor city where no one around you has ever navigated this, thrown into a starting job in a broken franchise, surrounded by people who need money from you, carrying the weight of an entire community's hope, and trying to learn a professional offense from scratch while everyone watches and waits for you to fail, nobody asked. The 2008 season showed flashes. There were games where the arm talent was undeniable throws that reminded everyone why he was the #1 pick, why the comparisons to Elway had not seemed completely absurd. He threw for over 2,000 yards. He had moments where Oakland's offense looked like something that could eventually work. But here's what the highlight clips didn't show. The weight was already climbing. Russell had arrived at the draft at 265 pounds ideal size for a pro quarterback at his height. By mid-2008, internal reports suggest he was approaching 280. By 2009, multiple sources placed him at 290 or more. The Raiders were reportedly weighing him secretly, hiding a scale in the facility to track the changes without confronting him directly. Think about that for a moment. The organization was monitoring his body in secret, rather than having a direct conversation with their starting quarterback about his health. They were managing an asset, not helping a person. And the reason the weight was climbing, the reason JaMarcus Russell was struggling with something that no one around him was naming out loud, was beginning to take shape in private in ways that would not become public for another year. By the end of the 2008 season, the Raiders had their answer. The arm was real. Everything built around it, the organizational support, the development system, the honest financial guidance, the basic human infrastructure that a 21-year-old from Mobile needed to survive what Oakland was asking him to survive, had never been. The machine needed him to produce. He was not producing enough. And nobody inside that building was asking why. They were already calculating the exit. In 2009, an ESPN Outside the Lines investigation published something that the Raiders had almost certainly already known for months. JaMarcus Russell was regularly purchasing codeine-laced cough syrup, what people call purple drank, from pharmacies in the Oakland area. Not from a dealer, not from some underground source, from pharmacies. Over the counter, with his own money. This detail matters because it tells you something specific about where his head was. This was not a man seeking chaos. This was a man trying to quiet something. The pressure of being the #1 pick in a broken franchise, the weight of 15 to 20 people depending on his income, the noise of a city's expectations that had never once asked whether he was okay, he was trying to turn down the volume. Purple drank is a sedative. That is its function. He was sedating himself to survive the life that everyone around him had decided he was supposed to want. The organization's response was not intervention. It was not treatment. It was not a single conversation on record where anyone from the Raiders sat down with their starting quarterback and asked, "What is going on with you?" Their response was to secretly weigh him in the facility track, the number on a hidden scale document, the rising weight as evidence of declining asset value, and wait for a performance justification to move on. 300 pounds. That became the headline, not the reason behind it, just the number. The system wasn't broken. It worked exactly as designed. In May 2010, the Oakland Raiders officially released JaMarcus Russell. The announcement was 3 sentences. His career record as a starter was 7 wins and 18 losses. His passer rating over 3 seasons was 65.2, well below the league average. He had played 31 games for a franchise that went through 3 different head coaches while he was their quarterback, never once gave him a stable offensive system, and had already calculated his exit before the 2009 season was over. Lane Kiffin, who was his first head coach, and who the Raiders fired after 1 full season, went on to coach at Tennessee, then USC, then Alabama, then Ole Miss. Tom Cable, who replaced Kiffin and was under investigation during his tenure for allegedly assaulting an assistant coach, went on to get offensive line coaching jobs in the NFL for the next decade. The executives who built the roster around Russell, who drafted him into organizational chaos, who kept him in the starting lineup because they had already paid the guaranteed money and needed to justify it, they moved on to other jobs in football. JaMarcus Russell went back to Mobile. And then, in July 2011, he was arrested in Mobile County on a felony charge of possession of a controlled substance codeine. The charge was later dropped. But the arrest was public. The mugshot circulated. Sports radio had a field day. The narrative was complete. The verdict was in, and the verdict fit neatly on a bumper sticker worst #1 pick in NFL history. Lazy. Wasted. Done. He wasn't numbing failure. He was numbing everything they had put on him before he was ready to carry it. But none of that. Not the release, not the arrest, not the end of the football career was the real bottom. The real bottom came a few months after the Raiders cut him in the same calendar year in 2010. His grandmother, Alzonia Brunson, died. In a 2021 interview with I Am Athlete, Russell talked about her with the kind of stillness that only comes from grief that has been carried a long time. He said, "She was the one person who never judged me. When she passed, I don't know. Something inside me just stopped. Something inside me just stopped." That sentence contains the entire story. Not the contract, not the weight, not the drug charge. That sentence. Because Alzonia Brunson was not just a grandmother. She was the only person in JaMarcus Russell's life who had ever loved him with no connection to the arm, no stake in the contract, no use for the #1 pick. She loved him before he could throw a football 60 yards in the air. She would have loved him if he had never thrown one at all. And in a life where every other relationship, coaches, teammates, the entourage, the franchise, the entire machine was organized around what he could do, she was the only proof that he existed as a person outside of it. When she died, that proof was gone. He was 24 years old. No career, no grandmother. The people who had surrounded him when the money was flowing were already drifting toward the exit. The city that had celebrated him like a king 3 years earlier had already rewritten the story and cast him as the villain. He had nowhere to go except back to the beginning, back to Mobile, back to the streets he grew up on, back to the only place that had ever felt like it belonged to him before any of this started. JaMarcus Russell spent the next decade in a kind of invisible collapse. Not dramatic, not public, just a man trying to find something solid to hold on to in a life where everything that once felt permanent had turned out to be rented. He tried NFL workouts with the Vikings and the Ravens in 2011. Neither team signed him. The arm was still there, but no one was interested in the arm anymore. The narrative had calcified. The punchline had been written. And once the NFL decides what story it is telling about you, that story does not get revised. He was 38 years old when he walked back onto the field at Williamson High School in Mobile as a volunteer coach. The same field where it had started. The same school. The same bleachers. He was not famous anymore. He was not wealthy anymore. He was just a man from Mobile trying to give something back to the place that had first given something to him. And then, in November 2024, Williamson High School filed a civil lawsuit against him in Jefferson County Circuit Court, alleging that he had taken $74,000 in donated funds, money raised by supporters and alumni, to invest in the school's football program, in the equipment, in the kids. The last place he had ever felt like he belonged. The last thing he lost. It's not that he was lazy. It's not that he was greedy. It's not that he wasted a gift that most people would have died for. JaMarcus Russell didn't lose $39 million because he lacked discipline. He lost it because a franchise in complete organizational chaos handed a 21-year-old from one of Alabama's poorest cities a contract built on a number that was never real. Put him on the field without a single day of professional preparation, cycled through 3 head coaches in 4 years. Around him, monitored his declining health in secret instead of addressing it directly, and then released him with 3 sentences and no support structure of any kind. He lost it because an NFL substance abuse protocol designed to punish rather than treat watched him struggle with addiction for over a year and responded with performance reviews. He lost it because every person who surrounded him had a financial incentive to keep taking and no incentive to tell him the truth. Not because of him, because of all of that. Williamson High School wasn't the place JaMarcus Russell ended up. It was the only place he ever felt like he belonged before the arm made him valuable, before the contract made him a headline, before the collapse made him a punchline. He didn't go back there to give back in the way a successful man gives back. He went back because it was the beginning. Because when everything else had been stripped away, that field was the last thing that still felt like his. And in the end, it was the last thing he lost. This story matters. Not as proof that athletes can't handle money, not as a warning about drugs or weight or work ethic, but as a mirror held up to a league that generates over $20 billion per year, maintains a contract structure that allows franchises to promise numbers they never intend to pay, provides no mandatory financial education for players entering the league, and then steps back and watches the collapse from a comfortable distance while the media builds a narrative and the public delivers the verdict. The average NFL career lasts 3.3 years. The average player retires at 27. JaMarcus Russell lasted 4 years. He was done before he was 25. And the system that extracted everything it needed from him, the guaranteed money spent the asset, depreciated the narrative set, moved on without a single moment of accountability. Nobody from that organization has ever been asked to answer for what they built around him. Nobody has. JaMarcus Russell is 39 years old. He lives in Mobile, Alabama. The civil lawsuit filed by Williamson High School is ongoing. There is no public statement from him. There is no redemption arc being filmed. There is no comeback in progress. There is just a man in the city where he started carrying the weight of everything that happened between the beginning and now. He said it himself in 2021 about the one person who had ever seen him clearly. Something inside me just stopped. That was 15 years ago. Some things once stopped take a very long time to start again. The arm was always real. Everything built around it never was.